Welcome. In this presentation, we will talk about some necessary and sometimes forgotten features that microservice in enterprise should have. We may focus in .NET Core, but in general, these features are common to multiple technology. In the concrete example, we will refer to .NET Core compatible application. Many of the features here illustrated also are valid for monolithic APIs, but in the case of microservice in enterprise, they are essential if you want to conserve the reason in a complex environment with several microservices working together. Begin for the health check test to the alternative of GraphQL interface, unified error response, discovery process, common logger system, NuGet package, and the unit and integration test. These features are a must if you want to develop and maintain a solid and trusted web of microservices. Health check is a very old feature used from the beginning of the microprocessor era. If you design a microcomputer device as a CNC matching tool, you will do at first a checking of all parts of the device with test program, and only after you get a response for that all parts are healthy, the program allows you to use the device. This is also used in the BIOS of each computer. Why this is now again with the microservice so important? The health check not only checks the status of the server where the microservice is deployed, for example, memory, and can check what configuration parameters are used. And more important, you can check the service dependencies, checking the access to the database and the health status of other microservices in your company, and even the communication with external dependencies that are not in your company. With a correct selection of tests, you will not only be sure that your application works, but also its dependencies. Because the importance of the health check, Microsoft has created an extension to facilitate the inclusion of health check tests easily in your APIs, namely Microsoft Extension Diagnostic Health Checks. Unified error response. A consistent error response also is important. In microservice architecture, several APIs can work concurrently, passing information from one level to other. A unified response to error makes it more easy to manage the error. A common unified error response is shown here. Normally, we use error 200 to express that the response was correct, reserved 400 to authorization and or validation error, and for severe errors 500 type error. This is very useful normally, but in the case of microservice, it's very important identify also from where comes the error. It is in the service or is it in one dependency? An approach is use a different 500 code to separate the internal error of the API from the error happens in other dependency service. This is not absolute, can be other schema, but in general it is a good idea to know from where proceed the error in a microservice net. Also, the response object should be the same for all to be able to collect the error from one level to another. An example of the object to transmit the error can be a list of code description object. This allows to collect all the error to the upper level until goes to the client. Auto documentation and discovery process for REST APIs. If you work with Windows Communication Foundation, you remember that Visual Studio generates for you the code of the proxy to interact with the service. This was done using the WSDL discovery service. When we went to REST, that was lost, but from 2011, Tony Tang begins to create a product to fill the gaps, Swagger. Swagger was gaining interest from the software community, and finally, after the support of the software companies and software developers, Swagger specification was renamed to OpenAPI Initiative. Thanks to OpenAPI, we have a tool to auto-generate our code in different computer language. Also, we may resolve other important things as generate online documentation, create simple test environment, and the best, generate our proxy class automatically. The OpenAPI JSON file is the tool to eliminating the initial lack of auto-generation of code of the REST service. With a lot of service running in your company, a understable documentation and the possibility of code generation is a must for your developer teams. Apart the original Swagger, there are a number of programs that use the JSON file to generate our code. Some of them are mentioned in the slide. Common logger system. Traditional approach. A system logger is a must, but sometimes it's forgotten. Developers have an efficient debug system in Visual Studio to detect errors, and they sometimes forgot that when the service goes to production, the only form that we have to know what has happened during the code execution is using the information recorded by the logger implementation. Traditionally, the database is the appropriate place to put the log information. In a monolithic architecture, that is okay. We implemented the logger as part of the service and give access to the DB to it. But in a microservice architecture, is this okay? Obvious problem comes with the necessity of configure each microservice to use the log. Security concerns are rising because all the services need to access the database system. This solution is less flexible and more insecure used in a microservice environment. There is other approach to resolve this problem. You can create a microservice specialized in logged information in the database. In this approach, the other microservice using the specialized service to log the information in the DB. Then the service itself don't need to have access to the DB and also don't need to be configured with a logger package itself. Only need to send information to the logger service. If you want to change the logger of your microservice ecosystem, you don't need to modify all the APIs. Only need to update the specialized logger service. That gives you extreme flexibility when you want to update your service and more security because only the specialized service need to communicate with your database. NuGet package for common service. Microservice can create a complex array of dependencies and be called for several clients. This may produce a duplication of code that leads to complex problems to update the service. To solve this problem, an approach is use a NuGet package to create the client libraries. Anyway, that your service needs to be used more than one time. This has several advantages. You only need to update the chains of the service interface in one place. Also, the visibility of the chain is increased. You cannot forget it, because the NuGet package indicates you that the existence of a new version. NuGet compiled DDL also decreased the time of compilation on our software. It is highly recommended using NuGet to mitigate the duplication of code. Do you have security concern with that? Well, create your proper company internal NuGet server to store your code. The NuGet server is free and you can install it in your company and restrict the access as you want. You don't need to expose your software in NuGet website. Unit test for continuous development. Unit test has a long way with the developers. In the case of microservice, we need to abstract the internal logic of our code from the external dependencies. That can be difficult because a microservice normally has a lot of dependencies. We should be able to test the logic without being attached to the dependencies. Create a set of tests, repeatable, and thus cover the most possible of the code. In this case, can help us mock the service to disconnect our code from external dependencies. When we execute the test, injection coding working with interface and use a mock framework can help a lot to achieve a suite of tests independent and highly repeatable. Examples of mock framework are mock and usemock. Repetitive integration tests. We also be able to run integration tests in order to test the application, the most near possible to the real environment. In many cases, test our API using the normal client can be very difficult, along to consume a lot of time and make very difficult or expensive to automate them. We need a tool that allows us to send requests to our API and creating complex operations that can be executed automatically or manually. independent of the normal client of our API. A good example of this software is Postman. Alternative GraphQL interface. Last but important is how to make our API the most flexible and efficient possible. If you know what client will use your API, you can create very optimized REST JSON response, very specific for the node requirement. But if you don't know what client will use your API, a good solution to be able to supply optimized response is to use GraphQL. GraphQL allows extreme efficiency because allow the client to get exactly the data that it is need and not perform information as is given for a JSON REST response. We are arriving to the last page. You can find more information about our videos in www.avalonsoftware.com. If you consider this video was useful for you, please subscribe to you in our channel. Thanks, and see you in the next video.